Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Muscle Expert Podcast, where we find the world's top experts to help you live your greatest life in your greatest body. And today's guest, Dr. Stephen Cabral, is no exception. This gentleman has just published a book called The Rainbow Effect, which looks at his unique integrative approach to optimizing your health and optimizing your physique. Dr. Cabral takes a slightly different approach to nutrition than you're used to hearing from me or my typical guests, which I love. Anybody that's going to challenge the paradigm and have an intelligent argument behind it is great. Him and I get into discussing how much protein you actually need to be healthy and quality of these things. We talk about balancing a diet and what that actually needs to look like to optimize internal function. One of the biggest things I loved about Dr. Cabral is his conversation around detoxifying your life. So everything in your life can be cumulative, and stress and toxic burden on your body, whether it be from food or water or pharmaceuticals, anything like that. And it creates what he calls the rainbow effect. So if we're putting too many things into our body that can potentially weigh down our body's ability to function, you're not going to have a great ability to optimize your mind, your muscle, or in Dr. Cabral's case, his microbiome. He's lived through some really interesting immune issues that we talk about quite a bit through this. And he talks to you about how he fixed his microbiome and how that became his passion for helping you live your greatest life. Dr. Cabral and I get into how cortisol and estrogen can affect glucose metabolism, as well as metabolic flexibility. We talk about minimum effective dose for protein. We talk about food sensitivities. We talk a little bit about DNA and how that's influencing all these epigenetic influences on our genetic expression. And there's a lot of things that go into living your greatest life. Enjoy the episode with Dr. Stephen Cabral. One of my favorite things that you're talking about is low protein. I love to talk about that.
Sure.
There's so many people that are very high protein. It seems like everyone suggests that everyone should be eating high protein. And one of the things that I've learned in my many years in this industry is if someone says this is the answer for everyone, your alarm bells should go off and be aware of like, hey, that's something probably wrong there, right?
Right.
I'd love to hear. Let's start with that. I'd love to hear you telling me about who needs protein. Do we need as much protein as people think? And who doesn't need as much protein? Is there a way to differentiate, like, hey, Ben needs very high protein in his diet. Stephen needs very low protein in his diet. Is it a genetic thing? Is there SNPs that we're aware of that are influencing need for amino acids, or is it just like this perpetual overconsumption of meat products?
Sure. So one of the things that I looked at personally was, this is over 15 years ago now, but I wanted to transform my body and take my genetics, which is more of that ectomorph or vata body type, a little bit of endomorph in there as well, and transform it to the best degree possible. So I was sitting probably somewhere around 155, 160 pounds. My goal was to get to 200 pounds. So in order to do that, I had to literally...
I started with that goal too.
I did. And you exceeded that goal,
which
is awesome. So I said, all right, that's my goal. That's what I'm going to achieve. And what I did was I followed the dogma of the day, which was higher protein in order to build larger muscles. So I'd have the amino acid reserve. And if I didn't, it could be used as glucose. Protein's able to really cover a lot or wear a lot of hats, as they say, right? Mm-hmm. So what I found, though, was that my body did grow. I did hit the 200 pounds, and I became quite strong and all of those things, which was great. But in the process, my body was not holding up, and I was actually getting much unhealthier along the way.
What were the indicators?
So my indicators were absolute shortness of breath on the way upstairs. It was increased sweating, increased what's called sympathetic nervous system dominance, which I would love to talk about that.
Yes.
Fermentation of the gut, so increase gut.
Gas.
Yeah, well, it as well as gas. It would also be bacterial dysbiosis. So I simply wasn't able to absorb as much of that food. So even though I was staying fairly lean, I was holding water weight for sure, and I was looking bloated.
You attribute that to high protein content?
And I attribute that to the difficulty in digesting high protein. So we know high protein is one of the most thermogenic foods out there, if not the most thermogenic, right? So we take that and we say, okay, this is going to need 2, 3, or more hours to break down, depending on the amount of stomach acid you have, right?
So there's the who that comes in, right? Because someone may have more genetically, someone may have less.
For sure, without a doubt. And then also, do they have H. pylori? Like what other type of infections? How many antibiotics have they taken in their life?
Yeah.
So what happens though is, okay, if we're doing 3 high protein meals per day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then we're also snacking in between on beef jerky and other high protein, your digestive system is always working. And if 30% of all of your energy during the day goes to digestion, you're going to start to feel fatigued as well. Or you're going to start to feel bloated because you're putting it's like cooking chicken soup, right? You're about to serve it, everything's good to go, and then you throw in some more raw chicken on top. Now you just ruined the whole pot. It's going to take another hour or 2 hours to cook that chicken down. That's what's happening in your stomach. You need to allow it to empty first and then put in new food. So we're eating too many times throughout the day if we are eating that much protein at all.
I love that, man, because I lived that life for a long time, right? This perpetual desire of to get bigger, and it was the only way to do that is I have to eat every 2.5 hours. That's all I knew, and I start to question, and I get a lot of coaching clients now, and they ask, Ben, do I need to eat every 2.5 hours? And the answer is I don't know. We're trying. I think the objective should be to eat as little as you possibly can to grow as much as you want to, right? Not to eat as much as you can to grow as much as you want to.
Exactly right. And the verse is also true. Eat as much as you can and still be able to get lean.
Exactly.
A lot of people are trying to literally eat as few calories as they can because they've misread the longevity research.
Right.
And the problem is when we start to go too low on the other side, we get depleted, become catabolic, and our body literally starts to age faster. Muscle tissue breakdown, bone tissue. Because remember, your organs will always survive, but they'll rob from other areas of your body. So there's a big difference. Like, as you were saying, increasing protein or eating protein does help you increase muscle size. Like, that's pretty much irrefutable, but there are limits to that. So I was eating 275 to 300 grams of protein or more per day. And the only way I was doing that would be 50 grams of protein minimum per meal, and I was at least 5 meals to 6 meals per day. That's the way I was like, because I also said to myself, and I had done the research, I had looked at nutrition, listen, I'm not going to eat 100 grams of protein at a meal because there's no way I can utilize that. So I said, okay, up to 50. But now if you're doing the math and I was trying to eat for more than the body weight I was trying to be at, it became a really difficult challenge. And then here's the big issue though. Changing your body and making it look as good as you can, whatever you decide that to be, is not always conducive to living a healthy, long life.
Exactly. Yeah.
So at some point when, I knew that I was going to be having a family and my own health was deteriorating, I had to say this, like, listen, what's more important for me now? And I had to find a happy medium. Of course, I want to stay in shape. But when I read the research, and this is legitimate research, the higher your protein, the greater the likelihood for all-cause mortality, especially cancer.
Tell me about that research.
So let's talk about it from all types of protein. We're going to talk about it from vegan-based, from fish-based, and meat-based. So when we look at this, we know that protein, like we can talk about new things like new 5GC, all these other things that are coming out. But let's talk about this simply. When you put yourself in more of an anabolic-based state, that allows for everything to grow.
Yep.
And that includes cancer cells.
Yep.
Like that, you can believe the research, you can pick out whatever research that you like, right? But that's definitive.
Yeah.
Meaning like, so I'm someone who literally, I always say, I have no dog in the race. I honestly do not care who's right. But it's my job for anyone that I care for my practice to help them lose the weight or transform their body to get well and live longer. That's it. And so when all the research is pointing this, and yes, there's a couple, of course, that will go against that. But if I know that protein or putting myself in an anabolic state will allow everything to grow, I know that it will grow tumor cells as well.
Yep.
And so the more protein you eat, the higher the IGF-1 levels. Okay? Meat has more IGF-1 levels than, let's say, lentils or beans, which is why they show those on a higher meat-based diet may most likely be more prone to cancer. Now, because you're just extrapolating that data.
Now, I heard you say that before, and I want to interrupt there because I want to talk about that.
Sure.
How much have you looked into those studies? Because my assumption when I hear about that, because I don't know, and I'm not questioning what you're saying, but I don't know, but I haven't looked at those studies, and I'm curious what the population was. Because if you're looking at a guy like yourself or myself, if we were to say, hey, I'm eating a high-protein diet, we're still healthy. We eat vegetables. We eat, we exercise every day. We sweat every day. We make sure we're taking antioxidants. We're supporting our body.
Yes.
Versus most people when I think of like a high meat diet, it's people eating Wendy's 3 times a day and people eating bacon and pancakes for breakfast. And that's what I associate with. So was it just normal, quote unquote, normal cohort eating, average sedentary people eating high meat, or was it like actually? What was the cohort?
So without a doubt. So it's general population, but this is a large, widespread study. But let's look at it 2 ways. So we can say, of course, that those people, so let's look at sauna studies, okay? So 19 minutes per day, 4 to 5 times per week, decreased all-cause mortality by 42%. It decreased risk of cardiovascular death by 63%. If there was a pharmaceutical drug that did that, that would be $1 trillion drug, right? So we know that's going to help. Now, so we say, okay, well, what if you're just doing sauna, right? Do sauna then to combat the meat. And I would say, you're on to something, but here's the thing. Why are we going to fight this study so hard? Like, that's the thing. Like, why are we holding up? Like, why do we need to eat so much meat in the first place when we know that the metabolic breakdown is more difficult for the digestive system? And that, so we need a certain amount, but how much do we need? And I want to get back to the study because the study didn't say not to eat meat, okay? It said up to 19% of your diets would be protein, okay? So between 10 and 19%. The higher you went above 10% of your diet from protein, the more the higher levels of IGF-1, which the higher levels then of cancer-based cells. And again, you don't have to believe the study. I'm not saying that for sure, meaning like this is something that you need to believe. What I want to do is simply challenge people to keep their mind open more to saying, okay, protein, anabolic food. The more anabolic I make in my body, meaning a balance between catabolism and anabolism, the more or greater potential chance for cancer. I believe that that's true. It did say any type of protein above the 19% was detrimental. However, it said, though, red meat and more difficult to digest meats that would have higher levels of IGF-1 would be more of the challenge.
How are they making that statement? What are they basing that on, the 19%? Any idea?
Well, they're looking at just cross-sectional studies over people who eat more.
Right.
So no, typically, so just to get back to your point, because it's a very good point, and I like actually having this debate. So if I read that study, I would say, no, I'm not believing it. There's not enough evidence right now. But then we look at across. So my job is not to be the expert in any one area. What I like to do is look at bioregulatory medicine, naturopathic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, functional medicine, everything, conventional medicine. And what I do is I look at all of them and I try to take all of the aspects of each one and use that to bio-individualize and customize a diet. So some people who could use a little bit more protein may be those people that naturally trend towards a little bit more catabolic, right? Because for them, it's just as detrimental to be catabolic as it is to be too anabolic, because there are also blood-based cancers that are more catabolic-based diseases. But let me get to that in just one moment, because the important point is this. We have the blue zone studies. Mm-hmm. We have other things where people went into this and saying, listen, I don't have a dog in the fight either. I don't really care. What do these people eat? Okay, from around the world, literally around the world, they didn't know each other. All of the longest lived populations had lower levels of IGF-1, and they ate between 5 and 15% of their diet from protein. That is exact from the study. And it was predominantly plant-based. Okay, so I would say this. If you're going to eat more meat in your diet, try not to have it at every single meal, but also make sure that it's balanced with a large amount of produce, a large amount of vegetables. Right now, my worry with the keto-based diet is that we're not eating enough vegetables because we're worried about the 50 grams or more per day of carbs, right? That means, and again, I don't want to go on a tangent here, but the best way to prevent dis-ease in the future is to begin eating phytonutrients today. Only fruit and vegetables, and that includes plant-based fats as well, are the things that help to prevent the cardiovascular disease, the cancer, and all of that. And if we eliminate those during a keto-based diet, sure, and I can't deny that in the short term, a lower carb, and we do this in my practice, we only do it for 3 weeks, but we do it in my practice, a lower carb diet is going to help you dramatically transform your body in the short term, but in the long term can lead to dramatic hormone-based dysfunction.
There's a lot of proof behind that. But speaking about these blue zones, because you brought that up, I know a lot of the guys have done those studies, and they're saying the only thing they can correlate with actual longevity is the fact that these people actually spend time outside and have cultural connection, meaning like they all take care of each other. They all have these little communal parties. There's no common bedtime. There's no commonality amongst food. They definitely have decreased protein intake, but they have decreased everything intake, I think.
That's exactly correct, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's one of the things. So there's 9 main things essentially that we're looking at. Now, and they can't say that there's no other evidence behind it, because just right down the street from where I live in Tufts University, they have an amazing health studies department. And they showed that those people that did include lower protein intake, they had longevity also with a lower calorie-based diet. So we know lower calorie works. We know things like sauna definitely work. We know getting outside and communing, because why? It lowers cortisol levels, right? So we're looking at less stress in the digestive function. We're looking at a lot of base things. I mean, people are saying 16-8 is so great. Well, part of it's so great why people like this is because now there's one less meal that's going to rob your body of energy. And also, the enzymes and nutrients your body also needs to break down food that we don't talk about.
Hey guys, I interrupt the podcast to bring a special message from Organifi. I absolutely love the idea of convenience and health, right? So for many years, I was the guy juicing. I was the guy jamming things into my juicer, into my blender, trying to get as many different micronutrients and phytonutrients as I could. It takes time. It's ridiculously expensive. I mean, I used to try to put 5 to 7 fruits and vegetables, always usually vegetables, into a smoothie with some lemon and tons of ice and some water. And it ended up costing me $20 to $30 per smoothie. You go to Whole Foods, it's going to cost you $20 just to get a juice. It's extremely expensive. So I'm extremely grateful that Organifi has been so gracious to offer you and me a 20% discount off their greens drink, which is an incredible tasting, nutrient dense array of superfoods. And it's honestly awesome. I use it daily. My kids even drink it. It's got a little minty flavor that just tastes awesome. They've also got the Reds, which I'm an advocate of using pre-workout. I'm also an advocate of using a little bit after you work out, just to get those high polyphenols in there. Again, not immediately after the workout because we want to have that oxidative stress, but maybe an hour afterwards with your meal. Great way to get some extra antioxidants and polyphenols into your brain, ladies and gents. And if you haven't tried the Organifi Gold, do it because you're going to thank me later. It's just an amazing tasting, calming formula that myself and sometimes my kids will enjoy before bed. And I hope you guys take this opportunity to jump on it and take care of Organifi because they're taking care of us. Truthfully great stuff that I use every day. My entire team here at the gym uses it, and we're loving it rather than having to, take coffee in the morning, which I did for so many years, and sometimes I still do. It's really nice to have that refreshing, energizing green beverage in the morning. Add some ice, throw it in the blender. Tastes amazing. You could just shake it. Tastes great too. But I like to have it nice and cold. And while I'm sitting there doing my reading first thing in the morning, it's a great addition to my morning routine and gives me the energy I need for the day. And I know I'm covered, right? If I don't end up eating all my vegetables for the day, I have my micronutrients covered. That's enough talking for me. Enjoy the rest of the show. And I don't deny that not eating is awesome. Like, I feel amazing when I don't eat. My energy is great. My brain focus is great. When I was competing, I was always tired. Like, my body was always digesting. It was just a terrible feeling. And I literally feel like this cloak has been lifted off my body so now that I don't have to eat every 2 hours. It's an amazing feeling. But most of the demographic of people listening to my show are people who want to build muscle. They're like, hey, man, I want to be anabolic. Like, what's the balance, man? What's the minimum effective dose to get the maximum amount of growth?
Sure.
And how do we find that out?
Well, then we can start to get into body type as well. Because I'm not the guy that says don't eat protein, right? What I need to do is help you achieve your goal. Mm-hmm. I literally work with Olympians, competitive athletes, guys on scholarship at Harvard University who, if they don't perform, they're going to lose their scholarship. So it's very, very important. Yep. So I say 2 things. Listen, if you're in your 20s right now, you're in your 30s, and your current goal, right, your short-term goal is to get to a certain size, transform your body, whatever it is. That goal is just different than your goal might be in your 40s, 50s, or 60s. Right. And that's okay. Like, I did that in my 20s. Like, it is what it is. But we can't say that is the best for long. The goal of getting and putting on as much size as you can is actually detrimental from a survival-based standpoint.
Let's say not as much muscle as we can, but let's say these people just want to get in shape.
Sure, that's a different story.
I want to be muscular. I want to be lean. So we're kind of towing the line here between health and optimal physique and longevity. Like, those are the 3 kind of main objectives I think everyone's trying to achieve, right? Like, I want to be healthy, which for me that means vigorous and rigorous and have lots of energy. Yes. And we want to look great, and we also want to live a long life, and that's kind of the trilogy for me, right? And I guess there isn't an answer, but I'd like to start walking down the thought process of allowing the listener to understand, well, where do I begin? And how do I make intelligent decisions along the way to kind of guide me so that I can have an awesome body, have amazing energy, and live forever?
Absolutely. So if that is the typical person listening to the show, and they want to get in good shape, but they also want to feel good, have lots of energy, all of those things, that's what we want. Like, that's our end goal. Yeah. Is being able to also exercise and lift and all these for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing as thinking about exercise and exercise. Okay, once you're past your 20s, you're in your 30s, 40s, and beyond, you're probably not doing 5 days a week. because of the wear and tear in the body, because you're probably not getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Your meals aren't perfect. You've got demands with family, with stress, with work. So if your job was to lift, well, then yes, you could do it 5 days a week. But since there are other demands, we need to find balance. So in my practice, all we talk about is balance. So if I'm looking at someone and they come to me and they already have a good amount of mass on their body, I'm looking already and saying, this person is more of an anabolic body type. In Ayurveda, they call it the Kapha body type. In our conventional medicine, we just call it the endomorphic body type. That person is naturally going to be able to add more mass. For example, in bodybuilding, you would want to be somewhere around the mesomorph with some of that endomorph as well to ever hope to achieve Olympia status, right? Or even have your name compete in the game. If you're an ectomorph and you're very, very thin wrists, it's going to be a challenge for you to add the amount of mass and bulk to get to there. Now, can you? You can push it. You can push it. But to be on that same level, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So when I see that person, though, and they're more of the catabolic, which means they're, let's call it a hard gainer, then that person would actually benefit from, now it's not high protein, believe it or not, because this person is more sympathetic nervous system dominant, which means they're in more of that fight or flight.
And ecto is going to be more sympathetic?
And ecto. So here's the thing. For that person to transform their body, right? Detrimental then for that 16-8 fast, right? Detrimental to skip breakfast. And the reason is this, that body is more of a glucose body burning type in the first place. They're more of that sympathetic nervous system, which means the body's going to tap more into glucose.
Is that just en masse? Everyone who's an ecto tends to be more sympathetically dominant?
Tends towards that, absolutely. And so when we look, and there's a great book by Dr. George Watson, talks about slow oxidation, fast oxidation, but think of it this way. This person, again, we just lab test everything. Like we're using glucometers for fasting glucose, all of these specific things.
Yeah.
And what we look at is just saying, okay, this person is going to typically, in a healthy state, produce more cortisol in the morning. Well, if I have them skip breakfast, I'm already putting them in a fasted state, which for a lot of ectomorphs is more of that survival-based state. They're going to produce larger amounts of cortisol. This goes for anyone, by the way, who's in a stress-based state. And that's why I have to be careful telling people to fast through breakfast. Because the body, the hypothalamus will literally tell the pituitary gland, okay, we need to produce this thing called adrenocorticotropin releasing hormone. And then your adrenal glands say, okay, let's produce adrenaline, norepinephrine. What happens with that? Well, heart rate increases. Again, you can take your heart rate. You can check these things to see if it's happening. Body temperature will change. We talked about the vasoconstriction, start to maybe sweat just a little bit. And then your body says, okay, we're primed. Now the hypothalamus tells the pituitary gland, let's release glucocorticoids. Those glucocorticoids, we know them as cortisol. Cortisol does what? Well, it helps to release sugar, right? It will literally go through a process called gluconeogenesis and bring glycogen into the bloodstream. So the funny thing is that a lot of people think they're in a fasted state, but if they're stressed, they're actually not in a fasted state.
Right.
If you drink a pot of coffee, we were joking about this earlier, if you drink coffee in the morning in a fasted state, you're most likely not in a fasted state. And you can test that with the glucometer for $20.
Or exercise, or going to sauna. Right. Those things are jacking up your blood glucose. Like sauna's massive. I don't know if you tested that at all, but like your blood glucose for a healthy person is going up to 120, 130. Just
I would like to test that. That's actually a really good thought. Yeah,
check it.
What about rush hour traffic in the morning? What about getting your kids ready and they're screaming?
Checking your email. Yeah, exactly, man.
All of that. So that's why a fasted state is not best for everyone unless you can ease into your day and you can just have a relaxed morning. Because once the sugar hits your bloodstream, well, you can say now your body has glucose to be able to burn. But the other thing is this, is that when you increase glucose, we talk about inflammation, we talk about all these different things, well, your body's going to start to produce more insulin, right? And then insulin actually creates this trigger with the immune system called interleukin 6. Yep. When that happens, inflammation goes up and immune balance goes off. Well, when that inflammation goes back up, what happens is cortisol kicks back on again. So you have this loop, literally this stress loop, and this is called the peripheral nervous system. So your input actually changes what's called the autonomic nervous system and turns on the fight or flight. So when we look at all of these things, we have to understand is that every individual does need a bio-individualized plan, but everyone needs a foundation as well.
Is that like a positive feedback loop situation where like the more insulin you have, the more interleukin 6 you're releasing? Or is it like, are you always getting interleukin 6 with high insulin levels?
So the high insulin levels when prolonged.
Got it.
So for the normal person, you eat a meal, you get a glucose spike over 60 minutes, 90 minutes, then we start to see it decline to 2 hours to 3 hours. Your blood sugar should be back to normal. And that's why it's so great for that $20 glucometer just to be able to test. By 3 hours after a meal, has your glucose gone down? Now remember, even a high protein meal can spike glucose. And this is the big issue because a lot of people are doing keto wrong right now. they're doing too much protein.
Too much protein.
And that will still spike blood sugar. So when we look at that, that's detrimental. And then also, like you just mentioned, exercise. I work with a lot of type 2 diabetics, and I work with a lot of professional CrossFit athletes. And after they work out, their blood sugar could literally be 300 milligrams a deciliter. 300 fasted state after a CrossFit workout. You're telling me that person's in a fasted state? Well, yeah, because they haven't eaten, but their glucose is if they just had, a supersized shake or something like that.
Crazy.
It's amazing.
So speaking of that high protein keto diet, that's kind of what I have been doing for the last couple months, just as an experimental thing. And I absolutely notice blood sugar. To be honest, my blood sugar actually stays consistent, but I can't get into ketosis. So my ketones stay very low, which is very interesting. So my blood sugar, even after a meal, won't go above 90, 95, like 92. Sure. But the ketones stay very, very low. Why do you think that is?
Well, because so remember, protein is that high thermogenic food, right? Mm-hmm. So you're getting a super slow release of your body being able to just use the glucose that it needs. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we just go back to what happens if there's no balance to that in the long run. Like what happens if there isn't the phytonutrients and the micronutrients from all the plants? So if that's not the foundation of your diet, I just really believe that in the long run, for longevity and health-based, it's not going to be there. Meaning that with that meal, if there is high protein and there's a good amount of fats, we need to make sure that it's also balanced with those phytonutrients coming from the vegetables.
Completely agree, man. Like I always joke that I'm half vegan and half carnivore because I eat a tremendous amount of vegetables and I would say a tremendous amount of meat. Usually it's a good portion of meat, but very concerned with micronutrients, obviously, and trying to get diverse foods. And now walking down that path a little bit, talk to me about lectins. Talk to me about phytic acid, because there's so many people out there saying, well, vegetables are bad. You shouldn't eat vegetables. Vegetables are meant to, irritate the GI tract. They're meant to so maybe fruits are useful to be eaten because you're eating, something that's maybe meant to be eaten. But vegetables, people will argue that are causing problems.
So I feel like we're always trying to take a point and it's like this big media thing a lot of time, right? So like I actually like Dr. Gundry's work and he kind of brought it to us, right? If we're going to talk about that, we might as well talk about Dr. Gundry. But if you read, I read everything. So read his book and I'm like, okay, this really isn't about lectins. This is about healing your gut. Yeah. Because he says at the end of the book, you can eat lectins. You just have to heal your gut. That was it. And that's the truth. So if you are bothered by lectins, like I was as a teenager for sure, and they were creating histamine issues and mastocytosis and all sorts of allergy-based issues. Okay, I get it. Like I had autoimmune issues. I had all that. But the problem is this, that if vegetables cause you bloating and gas, there's most likely some type of gut dysbiosis. There's most likely candida overgrowth from taking antibiotics. Most of us grew up on antibiotics. Or there's H. pylori, or there's something that's causing that for all those prebiotic fibers to ferment in the gut. Now with vegetables are literally what we have the best science, and fruit, mainly the low glycemic berries, but the best science on literally preventing the top 3 forms of death, which account for basically 75% of all death out there, which is cardiovascular, it's stroke, it's cancer, it's all of those things. And if cancer is going to overtake cardiovascular disease by the year 2030 and hit 1 out of 2 people, we need to be looking at what are the things in the environment and what are the things in our diet that could contribute to cancer, and really from like a fundamental standpoint. Like when we look at it, like all of this produce provides literally, like I was saying, the phytochemicals, the nutrients, which help to nullify or kill cancer cells. They're also not high in IGF-1. Getting back to your point on lectins though, lectins is a real thing, right? It absolutely is a natural pesticide within the plant to keep other pests away. So some people have a greater propensity towards being lectin sensitive because of their genes. It's a smaller percent of the population. Most people don't need to worry about that. Those people that do can still cook down the vegetables, which is going to, or sprout or whatever, to reduce the lectin load on those particular vegetables. Or they can just go lower lectin vegetables in general. But my goal is to get people eating those vegetables for one other reason as well. And those are the natural prebiotics in those that feed the 100 trillion gut bacteria that actually begins to diminish on a higher fat, higher protein, lower carbohydrate diet, which no one's talking about. And now you're talking about bacteroides and firmicutes, which actually help balance weight. You're talking about the immune-based cells. That's a dangerous thing to be playing with for a long time.
Completely agree with that, because that's one thing I noticed after a quasi-extended period on a ketogenic diet, that you start introducing these other foods that used to be okay, and now a little bit of it's causing a bit of a GI thing, GI distress, I guess. Mm-hmm. And it's just, going a little bit over and above thinking about what's happening. It's just, well, that's probably the lack of the bacteria that would be necessary to break it down and digest it.
Without a doubt. And then it's also like, we're always talking about becoming fat adapted. Well, why can't we talk about becoming glucose adapted or sugar adapted? You should be able to burn glucose without putting on body fat. Now it's just a level then for each person.
Sure.
So, when I have someone come into my practice and they look at carbs and they put on body fat, especially around the middle, I'm thinking, okay, cortisol imbalance, estrogen dominance, cell receptors shut down in the cells.
Sure.
But everyone's saying like, well, no, we'll just eliminate the carbs. No, the carbs weren't necessarily the issue. It's going to haunt you in the future if you do not correct the underlying root causes now. Or I stopped eating carbs. So one of my favorite people in the world is Dr. Jordan Peterson, right? Love his stuff. Love it. He's on a carnivore-based diet. And my greatest want is to help people like that. Because the truth is he feels better on a carnivore-based diet. But here's the issue, though. He feels better on it because there's almost 100% certain there's something going on with his gut that helped cause that autoimmune issue.
You can see it on him.
For sure.
There's something going, yeah.
You know that because he's training more catabolic, and you know that there's gut permeability-based issues. It's already implicated in 90% of all autoimmune issues. He has an autoimmune issue. For sure, there's candida overgrowth, there's SIBO, there's parasites, there's H. pylori, there's something.
Well, he admits to excessive alcohol consumption. He talks about that.
I did not know that. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Not now. He stopped.
In the past.
In the past. But what's that doing to your gut, right? What's that doing to your bacteria? It's just killing you.
For sure.
And I'm sure there's other things involved that we don't know about that guarantee. I completely agree with you. But sometimes that is a great solution for people short term, right? Like eliminate all these problems and then let's slowly reintroduce. And I'm sure at some point, being as bright of a gentleman as he is, he's going to realize like, hey, maybe I'm missing something.
So I agree with that. But then think about this, and I love the Joe Rogan podcast. You're on a stage of, I don't know how many podcast listens Rogan gets on his podcast, but let's talk about like 10 million or so. All I'm saying is this. Now we're bringing up something such as the carnivore-based diet, which for long-term, really, we have to be careful promoting those types of things. And again, this is not Jordan Peterson's fault. He's showing something that works for him, is absolutely working for him. But it's working for him and it's working for others as a Band-Aid-based approach because they can't eat vegetables or lectins because it would cause then the fermentation, the bacterial overgrowth, because they're feeding negative-based bacteria that you don't want in your gut.
How did he qualify, quote unquote, works for him? Is there any I just feel good? Was that the subjective?
Well, he had a complete cessation of his rheumatoid, I believe it was rheumatoid arthritis. I don't want to misspeak on this, but it's a complete cessation for both he and his daughter.
I heard that.
Of whatever their autoimmune was. And they're correct because they automatically shrank the amount of bacteria by not eating any types of vegetables or fruit, which contain fructo, oligo, di, mono, and polysaccharides, right? Those aren't bad in the long run. We do eliminate them as well. We eliminate them for 6 to 12 weeks with people with those types of overgrowth. But we are still eating some vegetables that are not on the FODMAP and not on the higher lectin, and then we're slowly reintroducing them. And so my goal is that he does the same, and then his daughter, and then they teach others as well. Because my goal isn't to be the one to teach everybody, but I would love for other people to say, this is what worked for me. This is what I found out. Now here's the follow-up, right? Because I want to be healthy for life.
And the reality is, this is what works for me now. Should be the statement, right? Because we haven't talked about seasonality, we haven't talked about stress, we haven't talked about lifestyle factors. There's so many things that can go into contributing to determining what amount of protein you should be having.
Without a doubt.
Pulling back, come back to protein, because we didn't really give anyone action items and a takeaway on how they should determine their protein intake. I'd like to actually get into talking about your approach and your belief as to how much protein is actually necessary.
The minimal dose needed in order to achieve the result that you want.
Right. How do we quantify that?
What I start is the minimum dose needed. The minimum dose for being a healthy human, which is about half your body weight in grams per day.
Yeah.
Right. So that's just a basis starting point. Almost everybody can get behind the formula of the 0.8 per kilogram. Right.
Yep.
So I'm like, okay, enough people have said that. We've completed over 250,000 appointments. Many of those being body transformation. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, yeah, it works. Okay. Now from there, we need to look at your carbohydrates and we need to look at your fat as well. So we're going to look at that, but let's just focus on the protein today because we could go on fat and carbs as well. But now I say, are you building the amount of muscle you need or we're going to talk about muscle because that's what we're talking about, protein for the most part. We can talk about it in terms of losing weight as well because it's a really great thermogenic food that's not necessarily going to add as much body fat. Because again, if we look at just the thermic effect of food, which people do need to know about, when you eat about 100 calories of protein, you do only get somewhere around 70. Now, again, it's debatable how much, and that's going to be different for every person depending on absorption and all that. But for fat and for carbs, yeah, you're looking about 94, 96. So you're getting much more in terms of actual or less energy used to break down that food. So protein is great for many facets, and we use a lot in terms of burning body fat, like getting people up there. Okay, so then we say, okay, you're not adding the amount of muscle you would like though. Okay, so now we say, if you're a hard gainer, I actually want you to add more carbs first, because your body is going to use the protein, just like you are right now, as a fuel source anyways. So why not get some carbs, especially post-workout, right? We can have the debate about pre-workout as well, but again, that's going to change per person. An ectomorph, absolutely pre-workout. An endomorph, absolutely not. No pre-workout in there, because we want them to really be in there at low blood sugar. But that ectomorph, I do not want them dropping into hypoglycemia, which is going to put them in exaggerated cortisol-based state. So what I'm saying is then add the carbs. Okay, are they adding the size that they want? Because remember, we're looking at sarcoplasm as well. So we're saying a lot of people are too glycogen deficient in order to get their muscles to swell. If you want more in your muscles, you need to get more fluid in there. And carbohydrates are really the only way to get fluid in there. And you know that. Right when you dieted down, you've done all that, before you get on stage, I'm assuming you're going to have some type of carbohydrates. Maybe I'm wrong with that.
Oh, 1,000%. I'm an advocate of taking carbohydrates. For optimal muscle building, I tell everybody you should be doing carbohydrate. You should take substantial amounts of carbohydrates in most instances, but so many people are trying to do this ketogenic diet. So I'm just trying to support them in an effective way to do it.
Sure.
Because really, it seems like the Wild West, man. Everybody's just kind of guessing. You know, Dominic D'Agostino's obviously got tremendous information. Danny Vega's got, tremendous good handle on it. But most people are they're guessing, man. They're following, it's the blind leading the blind, unfortunately. So I'm just trying to get the opposite end of the spectrum.
Well, and again, I don't want to even provide the opposite end. What I try to provide is just a balanced effect, right? Because we use a ketogenic type diet for the first 3 weeks for body transformation. And then after that, here's exactly what we do. We literally load people with as many vegetables and as much berries as we can, up to the point where they actually begin to, we're talking about fat loss, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about really transforming the body, to the point where they plateau. And then we'll pull back. Because now so here's the big thing, is that people are not going to become so-called glucose or fat adapted for about 3 to 4 months. So you're going to get your short-term results over 21 days, because we're going to, this is what we do, we're lowering carbohydrate intake. We're going to balance out blood sugar. Once we do that, we're balancing out inflammation for the most part. We're helping to balance out hormones. Sure. So when we do that, we're getting a short-term effect. But if we want to repair the cells so they can better uptake glucose, that's going to take 3 to 4 months, because that cell turnover doesn't happen for 90 to 120 days. That's why in the lab, we don't test people for hemoglobin A1C except every 3 months. So when we're looking at that, we're saying, okay, here's the short term, lower the glycemic load, lower the carbohydrates, because we do have to get new cell turnover, because our current cells, the cell membrane or the cell receptors, are not allowing enough glucose in there. We're producing the insulin, but the sugar can't get in. Now, if we lower the carbohydrate load, we ease it back in, we do maybe 1 refeeding meal per week, cheat meal, flex meal, whatever you want to call it, because we don't want to become leptin resistant either. Remember, like when your sugar is quite low, well, you're going to be lower in leptin. You're also going to be lower in burning body fat in general. So what we talk about is we always preach balance. Balance is what it's all about. And I know I can't give you the exact answer you're looking for.
That's perfect.
But keto, you have to question, like, why am I doing keto? I know it's the thing of today, but keto is amazingly studied in terms of decreasing cancerous tumor-based size. It's a medical-based diet that a lot of people are using in their everyday life, which is not necessarily needed. Like there can be a version of that. And then the other part is this, is it meant to be done long-term? That's my question, everyone. Should it be done in cycles? Probably makes more sense.
Absolutely. The first 3 weeks you mentioned bringing people into a ketogenic style diet, or is it just a
close to
carbohydrate restricted?
Carbohydrate restricted to just vegetables. But there is not a limit on those vegetables, because here's another reason. A lot of people aren't burning body fat, or they're not transforming their body because their body's starving for micronutrients. We talk about macros all the time, right? Carbs, protein, fat. You want to play with ketones too? Fine, we'll add that as the fourth one. But here's what we're looking at. People are missing micronutrients. They're vitamins, they're minerals, the things that lead to the neurotransmitter production. If you don't have those, your body's always going to be starving for more food. We've literally just used digestive enzymes, we use things like that with their current load, and now they're more satiated, because their body's able to better break down the food and get more nutrients. So the vegetables contain the micronutrients.
Good. So talk to me about someone in this first 3 weeks who's eating excessive amounts of vegetables, but has GI issues, has leaky gut, and we know they're getting tons of vegetables, but they also have leaky gut, which is, expose them to lectins.
So and you do have to ease vegetables into your diet. Like if you don't eat vegetables now, and you go to the 2 to 3 cups per meal, which is what I recommend. Could be bad news.
Yeah, exactly.
So here's what we do. We just ease back in. You're going to do a cup for a week at each meal, and then you go to 2 cups, and ideally you want you 2 to 3 cups, because right now, great research behind 7 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. There's real research behind that. And believe me, I don't believe in the FDA guidelines and any of that. I'm not saying you should drink a glass of milk at every meal. I'm not that guy.
Come on.
But although it is an anabolic food. So when we look at that, we're saying, but if someone then gets bloating from these foods, we're going to run a food sensitivity test, not for the bloating. We're going to run that for long-term inflammation. We run an IgG food sensitivity test. But honestly, we just say, you shouldn't get bloated from healthy foods. Let's run what's called an organic acids test to look at Clostridium difficile, to look at Candida overgrowth. At the same time, we're going to get your vitamin markers. And then we'll also run a stool test. We'll look for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We'll look for Klebsiella. We'll look for parasites. Parasites aren't going to be the thing that ferments, but the bacteria is. And then we'll say, listen, here's the issue why you had it. Now, here's a new vegetable and fruit list. We don't eliminate them. We just give you the ones that are not fermentable so that you can still eat and you can still get those phytonutrients.
Beautiful. That was my next question is, if I'm eating 2 to 3 cups of vegetables and I walk into my typical Whole Foods, I have like 6 vegetables to choose from. Is there a concern there with overeating these very limited number of vegetables we have access to?
That's a great question. I'm literally trying to think of the show. I either just recorded it and it's coming out or not, or it just came out. Sometimes I can't remember when it's going to be. So I said this, is that I have 7 go-to foods, like 7 go-to foods that I'm eating every single day.
I have them too, and we'll exchange as soon as you're done.
So I literally, and so these are my ones that I feel amazing on, but we can't go by the feeling of amazing. If you wake up in the morning and you're exercising and you're drinking coffee, you're going to feel amazing, right? Sure. Amazing. But that's not healthy for you, because you can literally just do a cortisol test and see what's going on in your body, right? So that's why I can't recommend functional medicine tests enough. Hopefully we get to chat a little bit about how easy that is. But the bigger thing is this, is that people's food sensitivities, they don't know them. And that's because a typical food sensitivity, like, I can't eat dairy because I get bloated and I have gas and all that. Well, that's not a food sensitivity. That's a digestive-based issue. Or maybe it's an IgE, immediate food sensitivity. I'm talking about IgG food sensitivities that happen 24 hours, 72 hours later. Yeah. The brain fog, the skin rashes, the joint pain, the fatigue, right? You're like, I don't know how that happened. Well, it could literally be a food that you ate 2 days ago. So we do an at-home food test, which tests 94 healthy foods that shows you. So once you know the foods that you love, great. Then just do a simple food sensitivity test to see if those are causing reactivity in your body. And then you'll know. You'll know for sure. We always say, don't guess test. At some point in your life, you just want data. So we can go back and forth and say, this might work, that might work, but it's the data that tells you what works.
So what are the foods? So basically what we're getting down to then is it's okay to eat a very limited number of foods in your belief. Like if you have 7 foods that work for you, that's what you stick with all the time?
So I'm an advocate also of a rotation-based diet. Yeah. However, I live in the real world, right? I've got 2 little girls. I have like 4 practices. I've got a lot going on, right? Yeah. So I have my go-tos. Now, in addition to those go-tos, I have other foods that I rotate in. But like, for example, every morning I do a smoothie and it's wild blueberries. It's hard to find another thing in the entire world with more antioxidant capacity than wild blueberries. And they're delicious. So I do wild blueberries and they're frozen. So people will say, it doesn't have the living enzymes. I know, but they're frozen and they're easy for me to pull out of my refrigerator and they still contain the vitamins and the phytonutrients and all those things that I want. So I pull them out, I put that in, I put spinach in my shake as well. I make a smoothie in the morning. Of course, I use other stuff in there, but those are go-to, right? And at lunch, every lunch, Monday through Friday, right? When I'm just at work, what do I need? It has to be something really quick. We spoke about this earlier. Means I literally go on autopilot. I go, it's a 5-minute walk from my office. I get outside, I breathe, I turn off that sympathetic nervous system. I try to listen to binaural beats and I'm relaxing my body. And then I'm eating, there's always broccoli at that meal. There's almost always avocado. Oftentimes there's some olive oil. And then I'm getting, I put hemp parts on that, right? So I'm trying to do, I'm not against animal protein. I'm not against fish. I'm not against eggs. What I do is bio-individualize this for the person. I feel better without a heavier meal in my stomach at lunch because it allows me then to have more blood flow and energy for the brain. So I don't want a heavy to digest meal. Now, I know a lot of people might say broccoli is hard to digest. Not as hard when you cook it, right? So the cruciferous-based vegetables are better cooked. And then you could eat raw. We can talk about that a different day. So those are some go-to right there. And then I'll get oily fish a couple times a week for sure as well. That could be sardines. Again, I do a lot of lab testing, so I just simply don't guess. I've run over 1,000 omega-3 tests. The only people that have ever come back with a balanced omega-6 to omega-3 ratio are those people that eat wild salmon, sardines, mackerel, or trout, no other fish, and they eat them at least 3 to 4 times a week. Everyone else is going to have a higher omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, and I will make that bet and wager against anyone out there because I lab test that, and it does not matter. Now, you could supplement with omega-3s, and that's an easy way to get that ratio up, but I can tell you for sure that that's the truth.
Love it, man. Now, you're an advocate of a lot of vegetables. Well, I'll share mine. Yes. So you're very close to mine. My primary one is wild meat. So I'm more of a quality than I am a quantity person. So I'm not trying to be the guy who's telling people how much protein you need to eat, how much vegetable. Eat what feels good to you. But I am advocating quality. So wild meats as often as possible. Blueberries is on the list. Avocado is on the list. Olive oil is on the list. Cacao is on the list. And coconut or MCT. Those are my 6, my go-tos. Yeah. So, and sometimes I'll add in, I eat cabbage, like red cabbage, green cabbage. Those are my primary, vegetable sources. And obviously I mix in broccoli and I mix in kale and I mix in spinach and occasionally sweet potatoes and yucca. Those are kind of like my rotate in foods.
Yes.
And sometimes eggs, like probably 1 or 2 times a week I'll do eggs. But
Same
very limited, right? But I find it works.
Well, and the things that you named too are very balancing as well. Meaning like the cabbage that you just named, probably the best prebiotic out there, right? Onions would be number 1, garlic, and then cabbage. For the amount of, meaning like those can really upset your digestive system.
I stopped eating garlic and onions. Do you eat a lot of garlic and onions?
I eat a moderate amount of garlic and onions, not a lot.
So, I used to, when I was dieting, it's this food that's amazing prebiotic. It was like another filler for my stomach. So I would eat ridiculous amount. One year I ate garlic at every meal. The next year I ate onions at every meal. I'm sure my wife loved me at that time. But then I had somebody come on, I won't say his name, that showed me data on garlic and onions being effectively anti-nutrients for your brain, like causing issues for your brain. So one of my new things is not new things, long-time things is I need to fix my brain. I had a lot of concussions as a kid. I had some issues as a kid. So I was like, I got to fix my brain. So I was like, if it's going to, run a risk, I got to pull it out. So I stopped, and I don't know that I noticed a difference, to be honest.
Sure.
But still, he showed me some data, and I was like, okay, well, that's substantial enough that I need to pull it out. So I went to the 3rd one on the list, which is cabbage.
Yeah.
Any insight on the garlic and onions?
So they're all actually everything you named right there, as well as the broccoli, are sulfur-based vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
So they contain larger amount of sulforaphane. So there's a hospital right down the street from me, Mass General Hospital. They did a great research study, and this is actually done with children with autism. And they use this thing called brochophane, which is essentially sulforaphane. Yeah. And so we're looking at it as it actually helps with both phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification. Mm-hmm. So what is probably the most important organ in your body in order to keep the body healthy? And that's the liver. And because the liver is literally filtering all the blood in your body every 6 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so if we can keep that firing all cylinders, and we know that the liver is responsible for hormones, is responsible for breaking down the metabolites from hormones, that's probably one of the best things that you can do. And we know that sulfur is also an anti-cancer-based nutrient as well. So what I would say is this, though. In natural medicine, we look at onions and garlic as actually more medicinal than as foods. So they're more herbs-based than they are even food-based. Now, I don't know that brain research that you're speaking about. I'd be interested in looking that over.
I'll send it to you.
That'd be interesting for me to look at. But what I can tell you is this, is that garlic and cardiovascular, heart disease, cholesterol levels is absolutely fantastic. So but again, if someone came into my practice with that, I could recommend that, right? I could recommend that at least for a period of time. Where they could help specifically with that, or parasites. Crushing raw garlic, swallowing that before bed. Great if you have parasites. If you don't have parasites, no need to do that, right? No need to do that, nor would I recommend it.
Awesome. So talk to me about glyphosate. So someone who's consuming copious amounts of vegetables, like I'm guessing you're not growing your own vegetables, and most people aren't yet.
Most people aren't, right?
Yet. How do we get around that? And do you believe it's a thing?
Without a doubt, it's a thing. So I know that you just had a guest on your show and you didn't believe it was a thing. It's a real thing. So glyphosate,
Right.
So I want to I wrote about this in my book, and it's really important to look at these things. Okay, because we get wrapped up in the studies, right? And there's a study for everything. So we can have different viewpoints. You can reach for a study, and I can reach for a study. But there's a couple irrefutable things. Sure. So in the lab, we're now, not me, but PhDs, other people in there working on specific studies. They have to use lab rats for the most part, okay? So what they're looking at is lab rats, and then they're going to take that data and then eventually maybe do some human trials as well. Okay, well, they need to give these lab rats cancer in order to work on cancer-based treatments. Well, the best way for them to give a lab rat cancer is to actually give them a specific pesticide that we put on foods. So if we know that, now it's at a higher dosage, I understand that. We'll get to that in a second. If a pesticide causes cancer in lab rats, would it be a good idea then to maybe load up pesticides on our food? And if they just awarded a man close to $200 million because it was a direct correlation in federal court that glyphosate caused cancer, and he's leaving behind 2 young boys. I have 2 young girls. It makes me emotional just talking about that. This is poison that we're spraying on our food. People wear hazmat suits in order to spray it because if not, they'd be dead. And what the problem is, we say it's safe because by the time it gets to us, it's at a lower level. But what hasn't been studied is the levels accumulated in humans over decades. And we haven't talked about why glyphosate, okay, as a poison, well, what happens is this. The bacteria in our gut are microscopic. The glyphosate is an antibacterial. It's an anti-pesticide that kills the pests in our microbiome. No one is talking about sucralose. People are like, oh, sucralose has no effect on blood sugar. I'm talking about sucralose, and I'm talking about glyphosate from what it does to the bacteria in the gut. And that's the important thing to look at, because if we throw off our gut, and we know that 80% of our immune system lies in the gut, well, what have we done to our immune system? And no one's talking about that.
Destroying it. Okay.
Destroying it.
Well, how do we integrate that then with a high vegetable diet?
Right. So there are levels, right? Like I don't want to overwhelm people.
Yeah.
I know that you don't either. So you start with where you're at right now. Like literally, are you not eating vegetables? Then just eat vegetables.
Sure.
Right? Like let's start there. Okay. Because you can get some nutrients from them.
Right.
All right. So the next step then is you look at what's called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. The World Health Organization puts out a new list of Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen every year. It's just like, it's their catchy term, but it's great. So if you can't afford all organic, because I know it is basically twice as expensive, then you eat the Clean 15 conventional, okay? These are ones with less pesticide, or they grow below the ground, or they just simply don't spray it, okay? Because bugs don't go after it as much. Now, the Dirty Dozen, you just simply do not eat unless it's organic. That's it. And that's where you draw the line in the sand, because then you're taking in all of the pesticides from those into your body, and we simply do not know the decades of data that will come out showing that these things cause cancer in our body.
Love it, man. That's the best answer I know I've ever given on that. I want to come back to one more thing with protein and ketogenic dieting. So if we know protein is pro-cancer, we know ketogenic dieting is anti-cancer, where do they cancel out?
So ketogenic diet is only anti-cancer when you have cancer. I'd love to see more data that shows people over 30 years on a ketogenic diet that didn't get cancer.
Gotcha.
So can't disagree with you. Cancer is tumors. Cancer, shrink tumors, lower levels of insulin. Insulin will increase. Insulin will correlate with higher levels of IGF-1. That's how we're making these correlations.
Acutely, right?
Yes.
So we're talking about using the ketogenic diet acutely is what you're getting to.
Acutely, but as a medical condition. So I don't know that we can prove yet that a ketogenic diet stops cancer.
I believe, I don't want to quote anybody on this. There was a guest that was on my show, and we may have talked about it off air, which is why I don't want to quote.
Sure.
There is some evidence, and we'll talk about it after, to suggest that I believe it was 3 weeks, so some amount of time actually in therapeutic ketosis, like high amounts of ketones. Again, this is very subjective, will begin to eliminate cancer cells in your body.
How many weeks was the study for?
3 weeks in therapeutic ketosis. So like high levels, like talking above 3 to 4 millimole. I think therapeutic is called like 3.5 to 5.5 or something.
Right, because that's the higher dose that anyone would typically get to unless you're on medical supervision, right?
Right.
So, but that was 3 weeks. What happens in the body in the short term? So I just want to let you know, like from a medical, so I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a naturopathic doctor. Okay, that's what I do for work. I look at how can we help people rebalance their body without pharmaceuticals. That's it. What are the underlying root imbalances? Here's what happens, not as much to men, but definitely in women, and a lot of women. So I have a lot of women come into my practice, and what happens is after somewhere around the 4 to 6 week mark of ketosis, metabolism basically begins to slow. They stop losing the weight. I test them on thyroid, adrenal, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, TPO antibodies for thyroid Hashimoto's, and then insulin, hemoglobin A1C. Almost across the board, we see cortisol levels start to rise if they're not already depleted. We see the conversion of T4 start to go down, which means that when the body is in a survival-based state, it actually starts to block the conversion to T4. And then when the body begins to produce glucocorticoids, so the first part's norepinephrine, the second part is glucocorticoids. When someone begins to produce glucocorticoids, especially in a longer fast, then the body actually stops the conversion of T3 inside the cell, okay? Or it converts it to reverse T3. Now you're looking at people going into hypothyroidism because their body has been told it's in a survival-based state. So 3 weeks, yes. 4 weeks, yes. I'm not denying that either. I'm worried about long-term putting someone in more of a catabolic state, taking away the phytonutrients from all the plant-based food that we know is tremendous. I mean, again, can we really fight against the Mediterranean diet? I mean, that's a real challenge for me to have someone say, no, that's not a healthy diet. As a foundation. Now, again, does that have to be tweaked for each individual? Absolutely. But I'm looking for wellness. I'm looking for longevity because I'm telling you right now, when you are 60 years old, because I have a lot of 60, 70, and 80-year-olds in my practice as well, besides the teenagers and everyone else, is that you're thinking about, what did I do, right? You don't want to be in that position when you're in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. Like, oh, I thought I was right. So let's just start with a balanced diet. Let's be cool with this.
I love the fact that you're testing hormones for people who are on that ketogenic diet. And tell me what effect you've seen hormonally with people on a ketogenic diet. Because you hear people saying, well, your testosterone is going to go up. And you hear people saying, I've seen your estrogen go through the roof.
Yes.
What do you see?
So there are phases
and cortisol,
to this.
I'm curious as well.
This is without a doubt. And so some of this, goes back to your genotype, which is, who you are, but never for the long run. So we all break down predictably in the same way. So and again, you don't have to believe me. and I don't even want people to. I just want you to literally open your mind to other possibilities.
Yeah.
But if you're in such a keto-based camp, and again, I'm not anti-keto, but if you're in a keto-based camp and you can't leave your mind open to this, what does that say for other areas? You have to just be open to it. And then again, you can simply lab test. So especially for people that skip breakfast, lab test. You're going to do an early morning cortisol. Now, in the beginning of the fight or flight based stage, the beginning of the sympathetic nervous system, when your body knows that it's under stress from viruses, from work, from workouts, from whatever. Anytime you're under stress from what's called the peripheral nervous system. When you get input, okay, the body's going to produce the norepinephrine and it's going to produce the cortisol in the short term. In the acute phase, it raises testosterone and DHEA. In the acute phase. And then the body begins to fail. First lowers testosterone because testosterone, the precursor to that is DHEA, okay? Then DHEA starts to go down. We see this predictably all the time. After that's gone down, cortisol in the morning begins to stay low, but you get the evening cortisol staying high. So you get what's called the tired and wired. Again, these are real things. Now you have a dysfunctional diurnal rhythm. You can't sleep at night and you're groggy in the morning. It's one of the worst feelings you can have, right? And then after that, progesterone starts to drop in both men and women, but it's really only an issue typically in women. And then we get estrogen dominance. We get fertility issues. These are very predictable things. And then with that, they start to gain weight. And the weight gain is cellulite. The weight gain is water retention. They look swollen. And they're wondering why they're continuing on, they can't get the same results from before. Well, are they still fat adapted? I don't know, maybe not. But the truth is that they're so inflamed and swollen that they can't get out of that position no matter how low they go. The other thing we're not talking about is that the more fat you take in, especially saturated fat, and again, I'm not anti-saturated fat, but the more saturated fat you take in, the more you're able to, if you have any gut permeability, is to take that bacteria, shuttle right through that cell wall. Now, your cell wall of your intestines is literally a cell. It's a cell. You move it through there into your bloodstream. And people wonder why there's so many autoimmune-based issues, right?
OPS, yeah. So
those are called lipopolysaccharides if people want to look into that.
Yeah. Talk to me about that. And that's just, I think you can probably condense that down to a really simple thing, but I don't want to just pass over that and not let people know what that is. Because ketogenic diet, we know, Dr. Tom O'Brien talked about LPS for the first time in one of the limitations of a ketogenic diet.
Sure.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, he knows gluten inside and out, right? That's his thing.
So, no humans. Yeah.
So so I look at all of this as well because I also live in the real world and I'm not a big advocate of gluten, but once you get yourself healthy, you've got a great buffer. We just call it flexibility, right? So the way to longevity, and Deepak Chopra actually said this, and I know that he's not always the biggest fan, but he said something called infinite flexibility. The way to stay healthy, I was just literally on the West Coast. I flew in last night. I'm in a totally different time zone, 3 hours later. But the difference is 15 years ago, I would have been depleted. I would have literally not been able to do this. Probably would have swollen glands. I'd have flu-like symptoms. I'd be completely sick. But when you get your body healthy, and that includes your gut, you're going to be able to eat more things with more metabolic flexibility. So now that I don't have the autoimmune, I don't have any of these things, I can go and have pasta on the weekend with some bread and I can enjoy it thoroughly, not feel guilty about it, and feel fine the next day. Back when I wasn't healthy, that would literally put me into joint pain. I wouldn't be able to move my thumbs, all of that. So we have to talk about getting healthy and doing different things at that point. Going back to the lipopolysaccharides, it is an issue, just like it is for anyone else who now has the condition to allow it to be an issue, right? So if you have a gut wall that's permeable, that means that, so everyone's born, your gut wall actually doesn't close till 2 years old, which is actually a really important statistic because when you're being nursed by your mother, her immune cells are actually being able to be absorbed through that gut wall, we'll call it instead of just through the gut wall, to be able to be used by your own body, right, as antibodies. So that's very, very protective. Okay, scales up by about 2 years old, you start to wean, all those different things. Okay, now at this point, it's supposed to stay closed for the rest of your body. There's 28 feet of digestive tract. That's meant to be the outside of your body. A lot of people don't look at it that way. It's a tube from your mouth all the way through your anus. And only the stuff that is supposed to hit your body is supposed to move through that gut wall. Mm-hmm. Your immune system will attack things if it sees in there, or cause all sorts of inflammation. But if we have an increased gut permeability from the glyphosate we just spoke about, from alcohol, excessive alcohol, from stress, from poor food combining, from fried foods, from antibiotics. And again, antibiotics, even one dosage for someone can be enough to open up that space. Now you're allowed to allow protein molecules or waste from the bacteria or waste from yeast or actual, again, the shuttling of a fat molecule attaching to bacteria and carrying it outside of your body to the inside of your body and allowing that to wreak havoc. So that's essentially what happens. Well, what do we need to do? Well, 70% of fat, I mean, if your diet is 70% fat, we really have to look at that as well, because you can look at all the ApoE genotypes and you can look at all the alleles. And even if you're an ApoE genotype 2, if you're an A2, it's only 2% of the population. But let's just say that you are, okay? Let's just say you're a 2-2, okay? Because you get one copy from each parent. You're allowed safely up to about 35% of your diet from fat, okay? Now let's go on the other side of the spectrum. You're an ApoE allele 4, double 4, okay? That means you're the most prone to inflammation. It's very interesting because when you look at the scientific research, it's like, oh, a glass of red wine a day helps to decrease LDL cholesterol. Okay, it does that in everyone except for 26% of the population for the ApoE double allele, well, 3-4 and 4-4. So now we're looking at it, yeah, the research is correct for 74% of the population, not for the other 26%. Right. What about them?
It's significant, but still not inclusive of that. You know, if you did a study,
it's actually detrimental to them.
Sure, but if you did a study, it would say, well, this is 74% is very significant.
You're right. That's what you're saying, yes.
26%.
Statistically significant.
Yeah.
And so you would then recommend that. Cardiovascular specialists will recommend that.
So what is a 4-4 ApoE?
ApoE genotype 4-4.
I understand, but what does that predispose them to?
They predisposes them to Alzheimer's
diet
and all inflammatory-based issues. So 10%. So that diet, they know that when you start going above 10%, you start to get more of those issues. Now, that's
saturated fat.
Saturated fat predominantly, but they're also looking into it monounsaturated and polyunsaturated as well. I'm okay with polyunsaturated to a certain degree, but it's very molecularly unstable, which means you can't heat it at all. You can't expose it to light. So you have to be gentle with those types. I'm a much bigger advocate of the avocado, the olives, the monounsaturated, okay? Because those have actually been shown in research as well.
I think we need to buy avocado farms and olive farms.
And to pierce the liposomal layer of cancer cells. All right. So, but also in the middle, then it's about 25% fat for the 3-3, which is 55 to 65% of the population, a 2-3 or a 3-3. So when we look at it now, again, I'm a big picture kind of guy. Okay, because if you're not going to do all the lab testing, you can eat somewhere between 10% and 35% of your diet for a balanced diet. Okay, so now we're kind of coming full circle, and between 10% and 90%, let's say 20% for easier math, in protein. So if I go to the higher end for somebody, 20% protein, 35% fat. Now we're at 55% basically, right? Now if you're at the lower end, 10%, and you're at somewhere around 10, 15%. I think it's harder to eat, less than 10, 15% of your diet from protein. Now you're about a quarter, right? So that goes back to me saying 2/3 of your diet should basically be plant food, produce. That's what I've come to.
2/3 of volume, not necessarily 2/3 of calories,
yes,
right?
That's correct.
So if you still got 75% calories left, you have to eat 75% of calories from carbohydrate. So it's not.
Well, you're going to go up to the amount of carbohydrate, and then the carbohydrate will actually change based on your goal. So if you need more energy-based carbs, you're going to use more of your root vegetables.
Sure.
Your yucca, and I didn't mention that, but that's every day I have Japanese yams or I have sweet potato. They're my go-to.
Yeah.
And they're easy, right? You can do whatever you want with them. But so then that actually changes, right? Because we can look at total carbs, and then we can look at the type of carbs that it comes from, because the response within the body will be different.
Tell me about exercise and how that plays into all this stuff. Like, we talked briefly about sauna, but does exercise change your ability to process nutrients? Does it change your ability to process inflammation? How do you integrate exercise into your life, and how do you recommend a client recommend exercise or integrate exercise into their life?
Yeah, so we work with it's a really great question, because it is different for everyone. You can work at 4 levels essentially with us. There's walking, right? That's the first step. Then there's getting into cardio, and I want to explain why cardio, and this is steady state, believe it or not. This is something that I've actually had to change my view on about a decade ago, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then there is resistance-based training, and then there is high intensity HIIT training, or it's very high intensity based training. So we have 4 levels. We have very low level, then we have moderate level, and then we have resistance based, and then we have the high intensity. So we're working essentially from aerobic all the way to a higher anaerobic threshold. The higher you go anaerobic threshold, the more input on the peripheral nervous system, which does what then? It increases more sympathetic nervous system dominance. Exactly. So if I have someone under a great amount of stress, their body's breaking down right in front of our eyes. We see that on lab tests.
Let's go do some high intensity cardio.
Exactly, right?
I talk about this stuff all the time.
But temporarily they'll feel great.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, no, I'm no longer tired because you artificially gave yourself a kick. It's like you rode a horse all day, right? Then it's time to sleep at night. And then if you put your boot in its ribs, it will run again. But it needs to rest in order to be adequate. So that's what I ask people. And I just say, okay, listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get you back there. We'll make you world class. I mean, we've done this with athletes. I never name names. And we work with teenagers that are Olympic hopefuls, and their times are starting to decline, and they might lose their spot. We always do less training. For the elite athletes, it's always less.
Yep.
And so just one story. So she's a 14-year-old girl. She's literally a freshman, 14 years old, freshman in high school. This is around where I live. She is going to be able to do the Olympic trials. Her times have not been progressing. She wakes up, she trains in the morning before school. She does school, she trains after school, and then she does homework until 11 o'clock at night.
Sleep 6 hours a night,
exactly.
Maybe.
Teenager needs like 10 hours of sleep. An athlete needs even more if you're a teenager. All we did was, and our parents didn't want to believe this, I said, listen, you don't have a choice right now. This is the state that she's in. She's not going to improve by doing more of what you're doing because you've already been trying that now for the last 6 months. Give her 10 days off. That's all I want, 10 days off.
And you know the athlete mentality, you can't do less. Like good luck telling me to do less getting to Olympia, right? I was like, dude, the only thing I'm going to do twice as much.
For sure.
And that's the worst thing people can do. And I'm the guy leading that charge in my realm, man. It's like, pull back, do less. And it works.
But it's hard to tell someone that unless they've been through it themselves.
Right.
So what we did is, and I said, I want you to do this. It looks like we don't have an alternative. We're going to massively increase your phytonutrient load. And again, you can do that through supplementation in the short term. Again, like we're big on supplements for the first anywhere between 3 and 6 months. And then we start to taper off those supplements as you've repaired your digestive system and the new cells have turned over. But in the meantime, why not get some extra nutrients in that body? She literally hit all PRs 10 days later. She did nothing in 10 days. Nothing except got more sleep, did her schoolwork, and that was it. So the stress load mentally she was wrecked because she was going to miss out from this. And she's been swimming since she was 4 years old. So now she can't make the Olympics, which are her dream, or at least get to the trials. So emotionally, she was a mess. Physically, she was a mess. We pulled back on both, and she excelled.
Now that I've got kids, this is like a very interesting thing for me, right? So I'm being exposed to youth athletics and elite youth athletes. And it's amazing to see how poor coaching is and how much ignorance is perpetuated because these, effectively an athlete's or a child's success is determined by who's coaching them. Like it's absolutely, if you have somebody who's competent and understands these things, it's almost inevitable this athlete is going to be successful. Conversely, if someone doesn't understand these things, it's almost inevitable they're not. And you're like, gosh, it's giving me kind of an analysis of the world and looking at the world and like, so you look at all these amazing athletes around the world and everyone goes, well, they're just very blessed or they're just, they have the genetics or whatever it is. And you go, no. That's not it. Because like, I guarantee there's thousands of kids who have as good or better potential than the ones who are at the top who just didn't get the right guidance, just got the wrong advice, got the wrong coach. My son plays hockey and, we've got these 3 or 4 coaches and we play other teams. We've got other 4 coaches and you just see their different approaches. And you're like, it's incredible to see that, based on what that coach is able to do, all these kids can go to the NHL or all those kids can go to the NHL based on that. If they're coaching them for a couple of years, it's incredible to see how influenceable these things are. And I'm very blessed we're very blessed to have access to your brain and your information. Tell me about the rainbow barrel effect, man. You got this book and I've had a great opportunity to look through a good amount of it. And I'm super interested in, tell me what that is.
Sure. So the rain barrel effect is, I got really sick when I was 17 years old. Like I never planned to be in this position. As a kid from Medford, Massachusetts, never heard of something called naturopathic medicine before, anything like that, right? So I got extremely sick. I literally woke up one day and had flu-like symptoms. I had glands swollen out past my ears, literally the size of golf balls. Heart rate was revved up, just standing out of bed at like 155 beats per minute. And what happened was 2 years of literally going from specialist to specialist. I'm talking about the best doctors in the world in Boston, Massachusetts, right? We have 3 of the top 20 ranked hospitals in the entire world. So it's not for a lack of education. The problem was, if there's nothing wrong with your blood work, then they don't know how to help you. And it's not the doctor's fault and it's not the specialist's fault. But what we've lost is the underlying root causes, which keep the body balanced. So a couple years later, I was lucky enough to be introduced to a functional medicine doctor. They started running these subclinical lab tests that don't necessarily diagnose disease, but find out what's wrong. I then was able to take the results and later get diagnosed, which that wasn't very helpful, but came up with Addison's disease, POTS, myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is basically like having flu-like symptoms every day of your life, type 2 diabetes, and rheumatoid arthritis. And people are like, well, how could you get all of those at once? Well, when your immune system literally begins to shut down, anything is possible within the body. And so that led me on then a 10-year total journey to getting back my health.
Where did that start with?
So it started with running these functional medicine lab tests and actually discovering.
What did the autoimmunity start?
Yes. So I was definitely, oldest in my family. All of us kids are 18 months apart. I'm, a stress-based type A kid playing 3 sports, trying to do well in school, all of those things. And then, because there's always, so in the book, I talk about there's 3 triggers. Well, the triggering event was me being on antibiotics for 3 years straight. I took over 3,000 capsules of amoxicillin for mild skin acne-based issues like most teenage boys have, right? Well, again, if you're a dermatologist, and he was an older dermatologist, and he just used antibiotics for anybody with acne, right? Because it can be bacterial-based. And you know what? It got rid of the acne. Guess what it left me with? A totally dysfunctional immune system. And that immune system was not able to be repaired within a month or so. And not only that, 20 years ago, you're telling me GI specialists know how to work with any of this? Even today.
No, they didn't even know what a microbiome was back then.
Exactly. Nobody. Still, today it's the wild, wild west, but we know at least what is causing a lot of the dysbiosis. We don't know about every single one of the 100 trillion strains, but we know about the stuff that shouldn't be there or overgrown at least, so we can absolutely do work on that. So that's how it got triggered. And then what happened was that most people in life are specialists, and I like specialists, right? You have a lot of brilliant specialists on your podcast as well. The problem is, as a specialist, what you do in that area is the greatest thing in the entire world. And it is a lot of times.
Right.
But what about all the other parts that may be affected by it? Integrated.
Yeah.
So what I practice now is an integrative health practice. And I look at literally, so after I got my degree, essentially it's a longer story, but I met my mentor who introduced me to how to blend functional medicine with Ayurvedic medicine with genetics. And so what I did was I said, that is, you helped me get well. She literally helped me get well. She just helped me figure out all this stuff. And again, but a mentor, like someone who comes to see you, somebody comes to see me, any coach in the world, the mentor is not meant to do the work for you. And I try to say this every single podcast. I met with her 4 times. And then, yes, we conversed a little bit by email. But what she did was she gave me the path to take. Once I did well on that path, I moved on to the next path. She helped me find the answers for myself. And that allowed me then to own it. And what I did was, just with my personality, I ended up studying all over the world. I studied in India and in China and Sri Lanka, and I studied in Europe and I studied in the US, because I said, listen, I went to the best specialists in the world. They couldn't get me better. Doesn't mean that they're not brilliant. They are. They're brilliant. And if you need acute-based life-saving medication or medical, you want to go to your PCP or the emergency room. There's no doubt about that. You don't come to see me. But if you can't get well, you have a chronic-based dis-ease in the body, conventional medicine or taking pharmaceuticals does not help to recover those underlying root balances. So I went all over the world trying to figure out whatever form of medicine is the best, that's what I'm going to practice. What I figured out, kind of like today, kind of like we're talking about, they're all great.
It's all of them.
It's when do you use it and with what person. That's it. Everyone is right and everyone is wrong for some conditions.
Talk to me about healing your gut, because obviously, how do we prevent autoimmunity? How do we reverse autoimmunity? How do we heal our gut? What did you go through?
Sure. So a big thing with me was, and this is, I talk about it in the rain barrel effect, one of the top 10 toxins is the actual gut-based microbiome, right? And it's because we live in an environment that actually does not help to keep that balanced. We don't eat seasonally, we don't eat locally, we don't eat enough of the good prebiotics, and we take medications and pharmaceuticals and alcohol and birth control and all those different things, right? Guys might not be taking birth control, but still. So what we do is we need to set ourselves up for success. And there's this thing, and if you can really study anything, and it can get complicated, but it's worth the study, is what's called the neuroendoimmune system. And it's how your nervous system affects your hormones, which then affects your immune system. But one thing that affects that nervous system is your digestion, right? So if you're always bloated, if the microbiome is off, if you're stressed, whatever's going on, it's going to affect what's called the autonomic nervous system, and that's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Well, the parasympathetic is the rest of rejuvenation. We didn't even really talk about that, right? That's the part that actually makes you grow and makes you repair and all of those things. Well, you want to try to get into that. You want to stay balanced. But if your gut microbiome is always inflamed, and that inflammation we know is going to set off another cortisol-based stream and the interleukin-6 and leukotrienes and all the other inflammatory-based markers, you're not going to be able to get yourself well. So you have to start with the gut. You have to start there. So what I did was I realized, and I got tested. I found out I had H. pylori. I found out I had Candida overgrowth, and I found out I had SIBO. The only thing I didn't have was parasites. So when I looked at that, I said, okay, well, and again, I went through it's trial and error. It is trial and error. Not anymore once you know it, but in the beginning, it's trial and error. Mm-hmm. And so I did the Candida diet, and that didn't work. It only worked while I was on it, right? So that is a pharmaceutical-based intervention that if you're just doing like a Band-Aid-based approach. So what I realized was that you need to eliminate first, and then you need to repopulate, and then you need to reseal the gut. When the gut is sealed, all of a sudden, your body is now able to better absorb the nutrients. There's not as much of an inflammatory-based cascade, and then hormone levels can begin to balance as well. But not only that, you get less of the brain fog. You get more clarity without having to do the caffeine. That allows you then to say, I'm feeling better. I want to take that next step.
What are the tests? So I'm very curious about, I believe at some level, everyone has some gut permeability, right? Maybe I'm incorrect, but that's kind of my experience. How do we know that the gut is sealed versus leaky? Like, what tests are you doing other than LPS? Because now we know LPS can be influenced with high-fat diets. What are you looking at?
I run what's called an organic acids test.
Sure.
Okay, it's my favorite, and the reason it's my favorite is it's urine-based test. So we're looking at things that were supposed to be in the gut that are now in your urine. So it shouldn't happen, right? It could be in your stool, but it shouldn't be in your urine. So that means at some point we've seen those escape the gut wall. They've been filtered. They're coming out now through the kidneys, and they're coming out through the bladder, and then they're coming in your urine. So then we can take that data and we can say, oh, why are there higher levels of like these waste markers for Candida? Again, you're not testing. The best thing you can do in terms of the gut-based issues is look for those waste markers that have been escaping the gut wall. Those will cause inflammation. They'll cause liver-based issues. They'll cause kidney-based issues, but only on a functional level, meaning they're not causing the hepatitis C, right? They're not causing like massive liver-based issues. What they're causing is this low grade. Most people are suffering from low grade inflammation and issues within the body. So they say, oh, well, why don't I just take some turmeric or some cat's claw or some boswellia or some bromelain? Those are all fine. But those are also what we call green medicine. You're using that on a temporary basis to relieve inflammation instead of using Advil, ibuprofen, etc. But what's causing the inflammation? Inflammation is not a root cause. It's not. Inflammation is still a symptom of a dis-ease in the body. So I don't even know where we're going with this, but I use the organic acids test. I use the stool test, and they test for different things. So I'm looking for Clostridium difficile, which can begin to overgrow after antibiotic use, and I'm looking for Candida waste-based markers there. I'm also looking at the levels of glutathione in the body. I'm looking at how hard the liver is working. I'm looking at butyrate-based markers to see what might have escaped from the large intestine, not just the small intestine as well. So it's an amazing test. It's actually 75 biomarkers. And then the stool test, I'm looking at for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, because there shouldn't be overgrowth of E. coli or Klebsiella, bacteria that's supposed to be in your gut. We're not talking about sometimes these are foreign bacteria. We're talking about bacteria that should be there, but not overgrown, right? Because we know that E. coli bacteria, believe it or not, is supposed to be there and help make vitamin B12 and a lot of other great vitamins, but just not overgrown. And when that happens, what does it mean? Well, if that's overgrown, that means a lot of the more pro or positive, and I don't like to say good bacteria versus bad because we need them both, is not allowed to be there because you only have so much space in those intestines.
I feel like every healthcare practitioner in the world is using this leaky gut or gut permeability as kind of a hook to get people onto their nutrition plan, but yet nobody's kind of substantiating, well, this is how I know you have gut permeability, rather than testing, and then this is how I know it's been healed. And it's very subjective, right? Unless you're actually doing all of these tests.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very, very subjective. One thing I want to get into is sleep. So, I'm very interested in sleep, very interested in the parasympathetic stimulus. And it sounds like this diet that you are advocating is probably very likely to relieve people of anxiety. It seems like, high carbohydrate diet, high prebiotic diet can heal the gut wall. That seems to be like, if I was advocating somebody who had anxiety to go on a diet that would decrease anxiety, that would be it. Are you seeing a correlation between that and people improving their anxiety and thereby with this diet correlating with better sleep.
Yeah, and it's good because we even talk about all the other things that can happen from removing carbohydrates from your diet.
Right.
And because we know that if you want to decrease cortisol, it's carbohydrates. If you want to improve serotonin, you can do it in other ways. You can actually drink caffeine, but that's not going to be what we. So again, we're talking about short term versus long term.
Mm-hmm.
So I am an advocate of, obviously, I'm not an advocate of saying high carb for everyone or low carb for everyone. I'm saying okay, we typically start at low carb if it's body transformation, then we work you up to see your current level. And that might change actually 6 months or a year from now. It very well may. So you always test your theories for even your own body. So in terms of sleep, we're looking, again, anxiety, sleep. If you are waking somewhere around the 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock hour, you're looking at some type of cortisol, thyroid, anxiety, some issue that's causing you to pull out of that, deeper sleep-based cycle. One thing we have to look at is, remember, there's literally an answer for everyone. There honestly is. So we look at sleep as this. It's lack of melatonin production. Because why? You might be in more of the catabolic-based state. You might be in more of a sympathetic nervous system-based state.
Too much blue light.
Too much blue light, which is going to improve or increase glucocorticoids because it's still daylight, right? There's a natural diurnal rhythm, which then, melatonin's in an exact inverse proportion to cortisol. So if cortisol is high at night, melatonin's gonna be low. You need now melatonin to get into not only a deep sleep, but a restorative sleep. And melatonin is one of the most powerful anti-cancer hormones out there. I keep going back to cancer because cancer is going to affect 1 in 2 people in your life, if not you. You have to start working on it now. Our entire environment with the heavy metals, with the glyphosate, it's all working against you. You literally need to do what you can to control your own health in your own body. So what we say is this, okay, there's cortisol, there's melatonin, there's a lack of magnesium, right? Because most people become magnesium deficient. Why? Because they're back in that sympathetic nervous system, which is burning through magnesium, glutamine, zinc, vitamin C, all the things that get depleted in that order, essentially, when you're beginning to come run down or you're buffering stress. B vitamins is another one. And if your digestion is not strong, you don't absorb as much magnesium either. Magnesium is not the abundant thing. So we look at that. Magnesium does what? Magnesium cuts off sympathetic nervous system. Potassium pushes parasympathetic nervous system. So we know, it might be good to have some higher magnesium foods at night or some supplementation, whatever you decide to do. And then, of course, there's neurotransmitters. If we're not producing enough serotonin at night and GABA often gets left out, then we're not able to what? Release those happy, feel-good hormones because we're stressed about the next day. So we have all sorts of protocols for that. It's okay, we do this. You're going to make your to-do list. You're going to get all that stuff off your mind. You're going to start to cut out the blue lights. You're going to do more parasympathetic nervous system activities, like maybe do an Epsom salt bath or maybe do some binaural beats, or you're going to put on your blue blockers. You're going to do anything that would stretch. Stretching's a great one. So a lot of people underlook the importance of stretching after a workout, not to stretch and make the muscles more flexible, but to then shut off that sympathetic nervous system. Right away, you begin rejuvenation. It's amazing. And you can do the same before bed. Stretch your hamstrings. It's one of the major things, hip flexors and hamstrings, to release tension in the body. Absolutely amazing.
Man, what an incredible wealth of information. I want to direct everyone to your podcast because I know you're doing one daily, right?
Daily podcast.
Tell me about it.
So it's called the Cabral Concept. And what we do is we just cover one topic per day. And it's on wellness. It's on weight loss. It's on body transformation on Thursdays. Fridays, we go through a bunch of different products because I'm just a huge advocate of this industry. I love the health and fitness industry. So I'm talking about, what are the best wearable technology, but is it also high in EMFs? I tested for EMFs.
Yes.
I'm into all of that, right?
Yeah.
Because that's, again, another one of those top 10 toxins. So, and then on the weekends, I answer people's questions. So we literally are 12 weeks backlogged in questions. We've answered over 2,000 questions on the weekend host calls. So, my job is, again, I always say to people, I have no dog in the race. A lot of stuff you might agree with me on, a lot of stuff you might disagree with me on. That's okay. Don't throw it all out. Just begin to question it. Be like, I don't believe it, or I believe this. It's why do you believe in it? And why do you not believe in it?
Right.
What I did in the beginning was I listened to all the paleo people, and then I listened to all the vegan-based people, and I said, what are they saying? And what are these people saying? And the ones, except for the carnivore-based diet, were basically saying a predominantly, let's throw out keto and carnivore, which are fairly recent. I know that they're not new. They've been around for a long time, right? But they're now in the media. The majority of the paleo people, the majority of the vegan people, the majority of the Mediterranean diet, the majority of the Nordic diet, the majority of the blue zones were saying predominantly plant-based foods. And then the paleo people were saying about a handful of meat or fish a day. The vegan people were saying about a handful of beans or lentils or so per day. And I'm like, can't we all get along, right? What are we arguing over? A handful of the different type of protein? So that's what I'm saying. If you want to do a handful of bison or elk or your game meats, great, do that. And if you want to just do hummus or sprouted lentils or mung beans or dal, great, do that. But I don't think there's eventually a point that you get to when you've been doing this long enough where you're like, I can't read this anymore without this being very apparent.
Yeah, it's all the same thing.
It's all the same thing. And when you meet, you met with tens of thousands of people. We've met in my practice, not just me, but all the people I have on my team. We've met with 250,000 people. That's a lot of data. There aren't that many studies that are more than 250,000 people. So when people say it doesn't work, I'm like, no, it works. Like it works. And now it is tweaked a little bit for each person, but there's a foundation for things.
Man, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. Absolutely incredible. And I'm going to direct everyone to your book and your podcast. So thank you, Dr. Cabral.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, man.
Thank you.
Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Ben Pakulski and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.